Elite professor forces young black man to solve physics problem, not knowing he's a physics genius. The Maxwell Hall Lecture Theatre at the prestigious Aldridge University was a place where futures were forged and reputations were destroyed. At the front, basking in the intellectual spotlight, stood Dr. Sterling Hawthorne. He was the dean of theoretical physics, a man whose arrogance was matched only by his tenure. In the back, silently wiping down a side railing, was Ezekiel "Zeke" Barnes. Zeke was part of the night custodial crew. He was dressed in the standard Navy uniform, and to Dr. Hawthorne and his class of privileged, exhausted graduate students, he was utterly invisible. The source of the current tension was the immense whiteboard covering the back wall. For the past 4 weeks, it had been covered in complex, sprawling equations related to the Hawthorne-Maxwell anomaly, a decade-old problem concerning energy dissipation in high-velocity particle fields. It was notoriously complex, designed to be the final, ultimate test of the student's worth. Tonight, Dr. Hawthorne was especially frustrated. He had just reviewed the midterm attempts at solving the anomaly, and they were all, in his estimation, failures. Pathetic, he sniffed, adjusting his silk tie. 10 years. This problem has been a benchmark for a decade, and yet, not a single one of you can grasp the fundamental constraint of the Riemann tensor transformation. We will not proceed until someone, anyone, demonstrates a shred of insight. He paced the room, his eyes darting to the floor, deliberately seeking an easy target to ridicule. His eyes landed on Zeke, who was quietly emptying a nearby trash bin. Dr. Hawthorne stopped, a cruel smile forming on his lips. He needed a prop, a demonstration of the simple logic his students were missing. "You," he barked, pointing a rigid finger at Zeke. "The custodian. Come here." The 30 graduate students froze. Zeke slowly looked up from his work, his face showing a mix of confusion and weary resignation. "Yes, sir?" Zeke asked softly. "You look bored," Hawthorne sneered, stepping closer. "Perhaps a fresh, simple mind can see what these overschooled minds cannot. I will explain the problem to you in simple terms, and you will tell me the solution." He didn't wait for a response. He walked to the whiteboard, tapping a complex section of the equation. "This, my good man, represents the decay rate of a charged particle. The established models fail because of a feedback loop, the Hawthorne-Maxwell anomaly. Tell me, Mr. Custodian, if the problem is based on the collapse of an imaginary metric, and the boundary condition demands stability, where is the error?" The students chuckled nervously, finding the professor's performance highly amusing. They saw it as a theatrical display of their superior education. Zeke slowly walked to the front, taking his time. He wasn't scared, he was calculating. He looked at the equation that had stumped a generation of academics. He wasn't seeing the failure of the students, he was seeing the professor's fundamental, long-standing error. Zeke had been studying physics since he was 9. Unable to afford university after his mother became ill, he had taken the janitorial job at Aldridge precisely because it allowed him access to the lecture halls after hours. For 3 years, he had been reading every textbook, attending every lecture from the back, and working on problems far more complex than the ones on the board. He reached out a gloved hand and touched the whiteboard. "The error, sir, is not with the Riemann tensor." Zeke's voice was calm and deep, a soothing counterpoint to the professor's high-pitched arrogance. Hawthorne threw his head back and laughed, a loud, derisive sound. "Oh, is that right? And where, pray tell, is the mistake, Mr. Nightshift philosopher?" Zeke ignored the insult. He reached into his utility belt and pulled out a fresh, fine-tipped marker, the kind the professor usually forbade anyone else from using. He began to write. His handwriting was clean, elegant, and perfectly balanced. He moved to the top left corner, where the governing equation was placed, and crossed out a variable, replacing it with something entirely different. Then, he moved across the massive board, rewriting the entire derivation in a flurry of focused, blinding speed. In less than 3 minutes, Zeke had executed a complete, elegant derivation. He introduced a new, non-standard variable, corrected the fundamental metric tensor that the professor had wrongly assumed, and closed the final bracket with a succinct, beautiful solution. It was flawless. It was the solution. The entire room was silent. The graduate students, who moments before had been laughing, now leaned forward, their eyes tracing the new math. They recognized the elegance, the daring simplicity, and the stunning truth of the solution. Dr. Hawthorne, however, looked apoplectic. Nonsense! That variable, the lambda sigma coefficient, that doesn't exist. It's an illegal substitution. You are tampering with academic property. Put the marker down and go back to your trash. Zeke kept the marker, but didn't move. He stood back and let the solution speak for itself. Sir, Zeke said, his voice gaining a sudden, powerful authority, the lambda sigma coefficient does not exist in your syllabus. It is derived from the non-local wave function of the de Sitter space, which you consistently dismiss as too abstract. It provides the exact correction needed for the dissipation, closing the feedback loop. The math is verifiable. You simply never considered anything outside your own lecture notes. One of the lead graduate students, a sharp young woman named Chloe, gasped, pointing at the board. He's right, Professor. The units cancel perfectly. That solves the long-term energy loss problem. The anomaly, it's solved. Dr. Hawthorne stumbled back, his face a sickly pale color. He had spent 10 years teaching that the anomaly was a result of his complex Riemann tensor. Now, a janitor had solved it in 3 minutes by showing the entire premise was wrong. Who are you? Hawthorne whispered, the arrogance finally draining away, replaced by the terror of public exposure. Zeke looked at his simple uniform, then at the professor's terrified face. My name is Ezekiel Barnes. I'm currently a custodian here. But before that, I was accepted into Caltech's PhD program on a full scholarship for theoretical physics. I deferred to care for my mother. But I never stopped studying. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a crisp, folded piece of paper, a heavily stamped, official document. And 2 weeks ago, I published a paper on the nonlinear dynamics of black hole accretion disks under the pseudonym ZK. That paper, which you praised last month in your seminar as a revolutionary work of quiet genius, was mine. I solved your anomaly in my break room 2 years ago. Dr. Hawthorne swayed, clutching the podium. The man he had humiliated was the genius he had spent a month praising. The entire class erupted in stunned, respectful applause. Chloe, the grad student, rushed forward, not to the professor, but to Zeke, holding out her hand in sheer academic admiration. Ezekiel, that was brilliant. You need to be in the faculty lounge right now. Zeke smiled, shook her hand, and then turned his attention back to the defeated Dr. Hawthorne. My shift ends in 20 minutes. I have to finish wiping these railings. And Dr. Hawthorne, Zeke said, picking up the broom he had leaned against the wall. Next time you need someone to solve a problem, don't look down. Look up. The janitor, the true genius, returned to his cleaning duties, leaving the most decorated professor in the university's history standing alone in the ruins of his own decade-old failure in hubris. By the end of the week, Zeke wasn't just offered a professorship, he was offered the dean's position, funded entirely by a silent endowment from an anonymous former student who had been in the audience that night. The humiliation was total, and the vindication was absolute.